So welcome to the afternoon sessions of the annual meeting. I think today this morning we had some how to lobby stuff. Lonnie showed us how to plug the holes we might put on ourselves if we don't do this right. And now Kat's going to pick up on that theme and tell us how to tell other people not to put holes in themselves with an overview of the Introduction to Range Safety curriculum that we have as official instructor for the Liberal Gun Club. But Kat, I'm going to let you take it away. Do you want me to pin your video? Do you want to keep it as a classroom like this? How do you want to?
I think classroom is fine. And then I'm going to be, Danielle's going to be my main ping person. I'm going to talk to her. Just because I teach one-on-one, and trying to teach to a room is weird to me, even though I'm in my living room. So, so I'm going to teach to Danielle, and I think you're perfect because you're familiar with firearms, but maybe not with having taught anybody else yet, and so you're perfect. You're who we want to speak to, I believe, as for this function right now, just to give people an idea of what they should be talking to anyone who approaches them, as far as, hey, I want to learn how to shoot guns. You shoot guns, right? And be like, yeah, let's go to the range. This is where you should start. Starting with live fire, and just, I think this a lot, and women, this will come up tomorrow too, probably. A lot of our first experience is boyfriend, husband, father takes us out to a place where we can go shooting, and they do everything. So they pick up whatever they're going to be using and what they want you to shoot with, and they load it up, hand it to you. And then all you do is sort of aim it and pull the trigger. And we don't really.
Kat, can I enter just one real? I forgot the important thing. If there's anybody here that actually would like to learn the material as a student, Mike can cart you off to a separate room. But if everybody's here to sort of be recruited, then we're good. And I'm just sort of looking through the list here, and I don't see anybody that is probably that new. But if you want to drop off into a separate room, we can get it for you. Otherwise, Kat's going to try to recruit you to be an instructor. Now I'm going to shut up.
Right. So we're going to start with casual instructing, right? But especially if you enjoy this, if you do have the opportunity to use any of this material, then that means you've had someone ask you to take you to the range. And from there, it's not so bad to become an instructor. It's a lot of learning and figuring out how to do the teaching back to people. Yeah. So as far as, I get contacted. It's either a coworker or I have been contacted through our email system. Dave sends that off and says there's somebody local to your area that is asking for instruction from us as a club rather than the NRA or anyone else. And I contact them. I get a 50-50 shot of whether they actually answer back. I've had a few, though, who have asked for instruction while COVID's been going on. I have taught a few people in their living rooms. It's been interesting trying to teach in person with masks on. But I've been teaching this. So we'll go from here. I think everyone is probably familiar, and we touched on this yesterday. We start with the rules of safety, and these rules of safety that the Liberal Gun Club uses are a little bit different than what everyone learns with the 4 rules, which was constructed by the NRA. Ours are a little bit more broad individually, but they are a little bit more comprehensive in the fact that they understand there's a dissonance in the 4 rules. I'm not going to get into that. Ours, I believe, covers that dissonance and makes people think a little bit better about how safe they're being and what they're doing with the firearm, especially a live firearm. So always keep the barrel pointed in a generally safe direction. Keep your finger off the trigger and alongside the frame until you're ready to shoot. Always remember that you are in control of a weapon, and if used negligently, it may injure or kill you or someone else. Those are our rules. There's a lot of whatabouts. We're not going to get into that. Ours cover the dissonance in treating a firearm like it's always loaded, because we know it's not always loaded. You have to overcome that dissonance sometimes, and that actually is what can cause accidents a lot of the time. So on to rules for teaching session. If anyone is following along, if you've got firearms in the room, we've covered this in just the general rules for the national and in general, but the no loaded firearms, any live ammunition, if you have any in the room, get rid of it. It needs to be somewhere else. Put it in a closet, put it in a different room. Anytime you're handling firearms in your home, your live ammunition should be elsewhere. And if you have places, you know, if you load at home, if you reload, you should not have firearms in your reloading room. So where else are we? I'm going to say so a lot. It's one of my nervous tics. Safety rules are in effect, same idea. I'm going to try not to like point at the camera just because it's kind of like I'm pointing at people, so it's weird. And then standard procedure to safely pass firearms. We will also go over that. All right, I'm going to skip through the basic parts of a handgun. We'll talk about the semi-auto. Danielle, you don't have a revolver, do you?
No, I do not.
Okay. I have yet to have revolvers come up. A good friend of mine that I started learning to shoot with, like she had revolvers, so I learned them from her, but I haven't had it come up otherwise. So I'm going to focus on, this is an intro to range safety and pistols, so that's what I'm going to concentrate on. So we're going to start with our semi-automatic handguns, and you've got a Glock, correct?
I do.
Okay. So have you ever gone through like what all the pieces and parts of your Glock are? Have you taken it apart and cleaned it? Is that anything like that?
I took it apart once, and just like the basic take apart where when you're done, it's in 3 pieces. Sure. I've done that before.
Okay. So were you familiar with, or did you become familiar with all the parts then with when you took it apart, like whatever training video you watched for that?
I just read the basic Glock manual that came with it, and found it very helpful and easy. I haven't gone any deeper into it, and it did have everything labeled, but I can't tell you that I know them all by heart. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and that's not necessarily.
I mean, I know what the slide is, and you know so.
Okay. So I've got two of the basic semi-auto pistols here with me, just so I can have both for reference. I've got a hammer fired and a striker fired. You've got a Glock, so that's striker fired. So the striker example that I have is my SIG X5 Legion. This is my competition gun. I will just demonstrate that we're clear and safe with this one. And then this is also a competition gun. So these are like crazy to demonstrate with people with, but this is what I have. So, but again, safe, empty chamber. So this is the example of a hammer fired gun. So if you look at this, it's got this hammer here. And when you take and it's also got the manual safety. Almost any gun that's got a hammer on it's going to have a manual safety as well. So this is a 1911 style, 2011 style, whichever one you want to call it. And when you pull the trigger, the hammer falls, and that's what fires. That was the one that I was just showing, was the hammer fired, which is, this one's also single action only. Single action just means that it's what it comes down to is the same trigger pull all the time. But in order for this gun to operate, you have to pull the hammer back manually. You can't, there's no, if you have a hammer fired double action. The first pull of the trigger actually pulls that hammer back on its own, which this won't do. So you have to do that manually. And so that way, if I were to carry this gun, I would carry it like this. Otherwise, I would have to either rack it or pull it back myself before trying to fire it, which could go badly if I'm in a really bad situation. So, yeah. And then something that's put together more like your Glock. You've got the striker fired guns. These don't have any visible hammer, and just pulling back on your slide and letting it go is going to have you ready to go. So those are a little bit easier as far as semi-automatics go. And I think that kind of covers that. As far as the pieces and parts, you've got your front sight. I don't know if it's hard to see, isn't it, with my
It's visible.
distance. Front sight, rear sight. When you hold it this way, you can see your front and rear sights. Those are what you line up in order to align your target. You've got a slide, stop, and release that's on your thumb side. If you're right-handed, that's what you're going to use to release and lock your slide. So if your slide's locked back and you pull that down, it will rack your gun. Trigger, slide, that's what comes back and forth. Your trigger guard, which is what goes around the trigger. Magazine release. Mine again is on the wrong side, but magazine release is right here. Depending on whether you're right or left-handed, you might swap that around. And this is your grip, front strap, back strap. Magazine, gun doesn't work without it. Actually, that's not true. If you've got a round chambered, it depends on the manufacturer, but all of mine, if I've got a round chambered and I drop the magazine out, will still fire that round. So keep mindful of that. Yours will too. Mm-hmm. So unloading your weapon really does require 2 steps, which is, well, first of all, magazine has to be out. So unloading your weapon, you have to drop the magazine first, and then you must rack that slide back to empty the chamber, or you'll have a live round in there. Okay. All right. Passing a firearm back and forth. This is definitely something that comes across, happens, you go to the gun range, part of your range safety issues as well. Most ranges, once you are set up in your lane, you've got your guns out, they do not want you moving those guns out of that lane. Like say you and a buddy, both rented lanes next to each other. If you're wanting to try each other's guns, the people have to switch sides. You can't move the guns. And that makes sense because unless people are being super careful and like walking from lane to lane with their guns pointed like this, which people don't do, then you end up with guns getting swung in weird directions and it's not as safe. So it makes sense. But also just in home, another reason why we go over this first before doing anything else with teaching is just safety, and just making sure that we're doing things so that we don't hurt each other or anyone else. So as far as making sure a gun is safe, before you hand a gun to someone, you've got what looks like a loaded gun right now because it's got a magazine in it, so you don't know. There are ways to know, but we're going to assume that this is loaded. So the first thing to do is unload the firearm. You're going to take that magazine out, you're going to lock your slide back. That's the best way as far as, especially going forward. If you're going to like keep passing them back and forth and checking them out, if you're always passing this way, this is the safest way to do it, so that the other person that you're handing it to knows automatically that it's probably safe. Again, unless you're actually looking into the chamber and making sure that there's nothing in there, you still don't know. Even if somebody hands it to you like this, unless you're looking right down that chamber at the same time, you really don't know. So always check, always check, always check. You'll see a lot of times people will always, set it down, and then when they pick it up, they're still going to check it. Even though they just did it 5 seconds ago. If you talk to anybody who's been shooting for lengths of time, they'll tell you ammunition has weird ways of getting inside weapons without realizing it sometimes. So yeah, and then when you're at the range, if you're passing them back and forth or whatever, say you need to leave your station. I need to take bathroom breaks. So the way to do that, and this is for the range safety officers' sake as well, so they don't have to worry about whether or not you've left a loaded weapon unattended. In that case, you're going to again unload just like you did. You've got your slide locked back, and you're actually going to lay it down so that the chamber can be looked into. So you are going to lay it down with the right side of the gun up so that it can be easily inspected without touching it, to make sure that the chamber is empty and that there's no magazine. And then of course always facing, I don't know which way is downrange right now. We're facing opposite each other. But you're going to make sure that it's facing downrange at the targets and not at any of the people behind you. And then just basically do the reverse. When you're taking the gun from someone, you're going to do the same thing. Check that, rack it, make sure that, make sure everything's empty. So anytime you go back and forth, you're both pulling that slide back if it's not slid back already. But always just take a quick peek at that chamber just to make sure that it's empty. Okay, I think we're up to talking about holding it in general. We start with grasping the gun. So the first thing that I try to maybe talk about is how tight you should be gripping it. And again, we're distance learning, so it's tough because usually what I'll have you do is actually grip my wrist, and we can talk about how tight that is. So hard to do in this case, but basically you want to hold that gun as hard as you can. There's a such thing as limp wristing, which a weak grip can facilitate that, and it can actually lead to issues with your gun cycling correctly. So if you're shooting a semi-automatic gun and you've got you're getting stovepipes and stuff, it really could be from like not holding the gun as firmly as you should be. So the easiest way that I can think of to explain it, I think the book actually talks about it. If you grip your gun as hard as you can, basically until your grip starts to shake a little bit, and then just less than that. That's how hard you should be holding it.
That's a really good indicator. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that's something that you can think about if you haven't been holding it that tightly. It's going to be something to get used to.
Yeah, I haven't been, and recently my cousin came to visit, and he was watching me shoot, and he asked me about that, like about my grip, and he said it looked like I was a little loose. So that is really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that's something that you want to watch for is you'll start with that right hand grip. You're going to take this meaty part of your hand, this part of your thumb and your right here, and where the beaver tail is. Some guns have bigger beaver tails because these are competition guns, but you've got one. You're gonna take that meaty part between your thumb and your forefinger, and you're gonna snug it up into there. You're gonna snug it up into there as tight as you can.
I think I got it.
Okay, and then so your trigger finger is gonna go right alongside the body of the gun,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're gonna take those other 3 fingers and hold as tight as you can. So now you've got this gap here. Okay, so you're going to close that gap with your other hand. So this part of your palm,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to go right in here, right underneath your thumb.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so your first hand, your right hand, your thumb is going to be right at the top of the handle, and of course right alongside, right in front of where that beaver tail ends. So you've got kind of parallel. And then when you close this gap, your other thumb's going to be right in front of it. And then when you close that grip, you're going to be just taking these 4 fingers and holding them right over the first 3 fingers. And now you've got your thumbs forward.
Can you see me? Am I doing okay?
Yep, that looks great.
Great.
Okay, and sometimes what I'll also do, like I do it unconsciously now, but when I was first figuring things out, they'll talk about the grip between the 2 hands being a little bit different. What you want to, I think of, my left hand is my support hand, and I think of that as I actually use that to help make the grip of my right hand tighter. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I don't know if that makes sense. So when I'm closing my grip over these 3 fingers, I'm actually pulling on them a little bit to help that grip be even stronger on the right side. And then I've got still a pretty strong grip on the left side.
Yeah, I definitely notice a difference.
Okay. And that is going to help a lot with your recoil control. When people are watching you shoot, what they're probably seeing is a wobble afterwards. Sometimes it wobbles this way, sometimes it kind of goes around. And that's from just not quite having a tight enough grip.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think that covers that. And when you first start doing that, you will get fatigue in your hands. I actually started using some grip strengthening stuff that I do like in the car when I'm driving and have nothing else to do but drive.
I feel it already, which tells me that I haven't been doing it properly.
Okay.
See, this is why I need a class.
Okay. Yay. So yeah, good. All right. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Let me take a drink of water.
Do you want to save questions for the end? I see Kyle's compiling them for you.
Yeah, unless there's like super pertinent stuff that has to do with stuff I'm talking about right now. I suppose we can address any of those questions while we're fresh.
I'll keep an eye out for that. Right now, the 2 questions we've already gone past by a little bit, and one's not related to anything specific that you've covered so far. So I'll just keep an eye out. And if there's something that pertains to what you're saying right now, I'll interrupt as nicely as possible.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So let's see. I'm just flipping through some pages here to make sure that I've covered everything. Okay. The one thing that I'm going to cover, even though we don't have revolvers happening right now. I do talk about revolvers really briefly. Hopefully, whoever I'm telling it to, it sticks in their heads for any time that they do handle a revolver. Especially because with semi-automatics, the best grip really is that thumbs forward. So you've got thumb and thumb. But when you're shooting a revolver, you've got the cylinder here. And when that cylinder fires, there's actually fire that comes out the side of the cylinder. It doesn't come out the back, it comes out the front, where the cylinder and the barrel meet. If you're doing the thumbs forward, your left thumb is going to end up in front of that or next to it, and it will hurt you really, really badly and possibly take part of your thumb off if you shoot a revolver like this. So if you come across a revolver, which don't let that scare you, they're super fun to shoot. But there's the thumbs tucked method that you'll use with a revolver instead. So what you'll see is instead of your first thumb forward, you're going to tuck that down, and you're going to do the same thing with your second thumb. Sometimes people will cross them over, or they'll just put them both tucked together. You can do either way, as long as you remember not to put that thumb anywhere near where the cylinder meets the barrel.
Mike says he has a revolver handy if we want a demonstration.
Sure.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'll do this nice and quick. Don't want to interrupt.
No problem.
Revolver is empty, as you can see.
Yep.
So the method Kat is describing, rather than the thumbs forward, keep them tucked in like so. So here you see the grip completely encompassing the firearm grip, and the thumbs are tucked. And here is the cylinder gap. I'm gonna get it right here. And I think you covered that. There's quite a large blast that comes out of there when the gun is fired, especially in something like this. This is a 357 Magnum, and there's a lot of fire and blast that comes out of that. That's why you want to keep your thumbs and everything else clear out of there. So thumbs tucked in like so.
Yeah, everything else about the grip the same.
Thank you, Mike.
Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, cool. All right, so now we're going to talk about stance a little bit. This one is the way my camera is set up. It's weird because you can't really, once I stand up, it's like hard to see what I'm doing. So I'll explain it the best that I can. I mean, it's really, this is the stance that we teach is I think the most simple one. It's a good starting point. Things can change, you know, depending on how you're built, depending on, you know, just your general musculature, all that kind of thing. Sometimes you need to change it, but this is a really good just starting point. So when you are standing, so your lower body, you're going to stand with both your feet, your toes facing the target. It's kind of the easiest way to explain it. You don't want to be duck-footed, pigeon-toed, or anything like that. You want to be kind of the idea is, you know, when you're going for that bullseye, you want everything pointed to the bullseye. And when you are, you know, hips are going to be square, your feet shoulder width apart, just like any good exercise video. You're going to kind of start in that kind of position. Knees slightly bent, and then your upper body, we recommend leaning a little forward at the waist, which is kind of, you're not going to do, I've seen a few demonstrations where I call it avoiding the latrine, which is like ass way out like this, which is fine, I suppose. But especially in my perspective, I'm teaching, the first thing we're going to learn is like defense. When we're shooting defensively, we're not really thinking about how deep our squat is while we're trying to shoot. So, you know, people think it looks super aggressive, and okay, that's fine, but nobody's thinking about that. So what we want to do is just get used to doing the most natural thing possible, because deviating from that will also be natural. trying to deviate from something that's really unnatural is just not going to work, and just everything kind of falls apart. So as far as starting to learn and learning from the perspective of defense, it's really the best way is just the simplest. So basically think of it as a triangle, and again, knees, which you can't see, but basically you want to make yourself, you want your feet to be in a pointed forward. So you're making a triangle up to your hips, and then you're making another triangle with your hands and your arms. You're going to roll your shoulders forward a little bit, and you're not going to, so that you're not like this. So you want to be forward a little bit, bring your shoulders up just a little bit, and then straight out. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So yeah, and that's kind of the hard part to demonstrate from here to get everything right. No, your elbows are not bent. I'm just fat. Sorry, I saw that question. You don't necessarily want to lock your elbows. You want them like just a little bit from locked. But what's happening? It's part of recoil control. What you want is a straight line, because that's where the power of the gun is going to go. And that's what you need to kind of counteract or let that energy move through, so that you don't end up with the gun like flying upwards when you're trying to shoot it. You're trying to keep this, when your weapon discharges, you're trying to keep that recoil like this as much as you can, instead of like flopping all over the place. So the reason for the shoulders a little bit forward, elbows as straight as possible without necessarily being locked, is to actually bring all that energy up through your shoulders. And that helps absorb the energy of the gun in the largest space possible, so it hurts you the least as well. All right, let me have some water again. All right, so the next part that we're talking about is trigger control. So when you're pulling the trigger, again, we'll check, make sure everything is clear, chamber is empty. All right, let me see if I can do it from this way. I think you can see everything. All right, so as far as controlling this trigger, you're going to use your index finger, obviously. Depending on how big the gun is, I think you've got a slightly smaller one, Danielle?
The 34 is a competition, so it's pretty
okay,
large.
So it's full size. Okay, cool. So finger placement, sometimes that can be tricky, just depending on the size of your hands. Generally, this part, the fatty part of the tip of your finger is what should be going right across the trigger. So if you were to hold your finger out straight and hold that one joint, this is where you want the trigger to be. People with really huge hands, or relatively large hands to the gun, sometimes they will actually use that joint. So I'm not going to say it's wrong. Just depends on the size of your hand and what you do with that. This is something that kind of comes up more when it comes to being on the range. But something that can happen is one of two things. If you've got too much finger in the trigger, you're going to actually end up pulling it. So if your finger's too far inside there, let's do it this way. If your finger is too far inside that trigger, when you pull it, I don't know if you can see the muzzle going off to the right there.
Yep.
So if you got too much finger in there, that's what's going to happen. And then at the same time, if you have too little finger in there, so if I didn't have just what fits my hand perfectly is right on that pad of the finger. But if I were to put like the tip of my finger in there, again, now I don't know if you can see the muzzle's kind of going to the left.
Yep.
So too little finger goes the other way. So your goal is a nice, smooth, straight back pull. That's what you're looking for. I don't know if you can hear the click.
Yeah.
So pressing that trigger smoothly to the rear is your goal. Talk about a trigger press because talk about, you know, the common nomenclature is pulling the trigger. And it's a little bit better for your brain space to think of it as pressing it. You're not pulling it towards you. You're pressing it you're just pressing it towards the handle. So you've got that trigger press happening, and your goal is to break that trigger without moving the gun at all. So that click happens. The other thing that I want you to do is when you do pull that trigger, hold it. Don't let it go. Don't do this. Just let that break happen. That's your bang. And then hold the trigger. That's something that I think a lot of folks don't necessarily get taught, especially when they're taught on the fly, is this. I don't know if you can hear that too. All right, so when let me see if I can bring this to the mic and not on my face. So you've got this. Okay, that's your boom. That's the gun just went off. And then the next part is when you start to release that trigger just a tiny bit. I don't know if you could hear that click.
Yep.
Yes, we could.
That's the reset. So I'm still holding the trigger. Okay, it's not released all the way. I can't tell if you can see. So I'm still holding that. That's where the reset is. And that's where I can pull the trigger again and have the gun fire again without ever taking my finger all the way off the trigger. And especially if you shoot your gun a lot, you will get to know that reset. And that's where you start being able to do rapid fire accurately because you'll know where that trigger reset is. And it doesn't reset until it cycles. So that's why I'm cycling it between each of these because that's where and that's one of those when you watch gun review channels, you'll hear them talk about uptake, reset, and all that good stuff. That's all the stuff that they're talking about. So yeah, so the next time you go out to the range, I think for you especially, it's going to be hard for you to teach this part. But the next time you go out, that's something that I want you to pay attention to because that's probably something that you haven't really been shown before is the whole that whole trigger cycle and the reset. It was a big adjustment for me when I learned about it. And it took some doing to undo what was already a bad habit, which was slapping the trigger. And that's when you let go of the trigger and just whack it every time. That will always move the gun. So if I'm just whacking at the trigger, that will always move the muzzle around.
Yeah.
Where if you're a little bit careful and you've got your finger on that trigger the whole time and you're minding the reset, it's actually going to move a lot less. And that's your goal, is that through that trigger press, you're not moving the gun. The gun might move you, but you're not moving it. And this gets you back into on target and back into shooting position much faster. Okay. I'm going to drink some water again.
It's a lot of talking.
And when I do this with clients, I've only got about 15 minutes before before I start to choke on myself.
Well, and then they're really anxious to try it too, so you get to take breaks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Where am I at? Okay, aiming. So we'll start with finding your dominant eye with aiming. And the reason that we do this first is because, first of all, when people are learning in the very beginning, sometimes they don't talk, this isn't talked about at all, because people that are not used to teaching or haven't been taught to teach don't even know to think about it. And then there are people that, even if we assume if they're right-handed, we assume that they're right eye dominant, but there are actually people who are right-handed but left eye dominant, and that can change a lot. And people have a lot of trouble if they start learning without realizing that they're left eye dominant, because there's a whole head position change that has to happen in order for your left eye to really see through those sights correctly. So the first thing that we'll do is figure out which eye is dominant. Even if you already know, we'll do this anyway. And I'm finding the webcam can actually be fun for this. So you're going to extend both of your hands forward, place them together to make a small triangle between your thumbs and first knuckle. So you're going to cross your hands where your first knuckles are, there, and then you're going to make a triangle with your thumbs. So pretty, not very big. So start with that, point it towards your webcam. With both of your eyes open, look through that triangle, center on a small object. Webcam is fun, the lens of that camera. And while you're put your hands all the way forward. And then while keeping that object visible in the triangle, bring your hands towards your eyes. And then whatever's so the one that's focusing, so you're focusing on your webcam first. And then as you bring your eyes towards your face, bring them to what's in focus. And you will naturally bring your hands to the eye that you're dominant with. So yeah, looks like you're right eye dominant.
I'm going to try again. I have one that's slower to focus, so I just want to double check. Yeah, I think it's definitely my right eye. It looked a little funny when I did my left.
Okay, perfect. All right, so also ultimately, when you first start shooting, your inclination is going to be to close your left eye. And that's okay. But eventually you're going to maybe want to switch that so that you actually are shooting with both eyes open. But there is some brain training there that has to happen. So I found that I really did have to close my left eye first for a while before I got used to my right eye taking over and just like teaching my brain to ignore what my left eye was seeing. So a lot of times when I'm focusing on a target, I do see two images, and I've learned that the stronger image is my right eye, but it's an adjustment. So if you feel the need to close one eye in the meantime, go ahead.
Oh, David said in chat, another way to check is to focus on something across the room and alternately close your eyes. If you can see the object with one better than the other, that eye is your dominant eye.
Yes. Yes, you can totally do it that way. This is just more fun because webcam.
Yeah. And Scott said, squint your non-dominant eye to train yourself to shoot both eyes open. Eventually, you find yourself using both.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that's our finding our dominant eye first. Our next thing is sight alignment and focusing with that front sight. So you've got iron sights. I don't know if you've heard people talk about iron versus glass, and if you know the difference.
I've heard a lot of talk about it, and I've
Okay.
also heard a lot of people tell me that I'm probably going to want to change my sights on my Glock. So but
Right.
this is what I'm used to right now. So
Absolutely. I shoot with my factory irons on all of my guns so far, and I shoot competitively. There are those of us who just like our iron sights, and then there are converts who have switched to glass, and of course will never go back. So it really just depends. So I do a little bit of bullseye as well. So so what you have are iron sights. You've got the regular old. I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
But yours are similar.
Mhm.
This one's got a really narrow front sight, and then it's just got blackout rear sights. This is usually preferred for competition only because it's just a little bit faster sight acquisition. You're not playing around with as much with lining dots up. You're just getting that that front green dot right in the center, and that's like, for me, that's the quickest sight acquisition for me. So when people talk about iron sights, that's these puppies. It's usually what comes with the gun. When they're talking about glass sights, they're talking about something a little bit more like this. This is a cheap kind that you can put on a gun that's a blowback style gun. This is my 22. So this isn't moving on the slide. People that have their semi-autos like this, when they get the glass sights put on, it's still the same idea. It's a red dot, but the ones that have to go on these guns are lower profile, and they're also made to ride that slide, which is a heavy amount of abuse. So they're a lot sturdier, where these, you have to, they can loosen up. That you still have to zero them once in a while. But you can get these cheap. I got that. This was like $30 or something on Amazon. But this is the glass sight. So you're actually sighting through here, and there's a little. This is battery powered, and there's a little red dot or green, whichever you prefer, that shows up right in the center of this glass. And to find your target, all you've got to do is just lay that dot over the middle of whatever you're shooting at. So that's what they're talking about when they talk about glass sights. That's these guys. So we've got different kinds of front sights as well. So if you pick up different guns, you will find that those front and rear sights can look a lot different. The most common is similar to what you have. The variances that you'll see the most are just going to be whether or not there's dots drawn on the back here. Night sights, you'll see people talk about night sights or the Trijicon style. Those have lights, or not lights, but they're like glow in the dark, or they capture light better, or they're all fiber optic. The end game is the same for all of them, and that is to line up those front and rear sights so that they are all aligned with each other, and that the front sight is directly in the middle of that dovetail in the rear. The best thing that I could do with this, I think, is just to kind of hold the book up. Just to demonstrate the best. All right. So here, this is your rear sights and your front sight, and this is how you want them lined up. When you're actually sighting onto your target, you're actually going to cut that target in half with that line that you make. Again, this just talks about, you can see the different sights. This is another demonstration of all the different kinds of sights that you'll see. I want to say the most common ones are going to be something like these, or something like these.
Yep.
And then when it comes to lining up on your target, this talks about this talks about like a bullseye shooting style. This is really what you're looking for. This is what your Glock is set up for. And that's that you're lining your 3 sights up, all equidistant from each other, straight across the top, and then you're going to cut that bullseye in half, and that's how you're aiming.
Hey, Kat.
Yes.
Patrick had his optic turned on and the video going. If he could bring that back real quickly for anyone that's watching the Zoom meeting. There we go.
So yeah, this is my COVID project. So it is empty. Actually, I have a laser training round in it. So it's a little trigger trainer. So anyways, this is a RMR cut slide for a Glock. And then I have to, of course, have taller than usual sights on it in order to be able to even use them with the RMR. And the quality of the dot is terrible when it's over a webcam. It's usually much, much smaller. And
that looks crazy.
yeah. As a fun side note, if you have astigmatism, your red dot usually will starburst. Which I do, and so I actually get to suffer from that. They do have etched reticles, which help compensate for that. So yeah, that's the RMR. And I actually
Where did you get the slide from?
So this is a Brownell slide. This is actually, it's not technically not a Glock, it's a Polymer 80. And so I ordered it pretty much as a kit. Came with the threaded barrel and the lightning cut slide and the whole mess. And then I pretty much just watched the Reddit gun deals for the RMR to come up, and then I had to swap out my sights because the factory Glock sights were about as high as the rear of the RMR here. So
great. Thank you much, Patrick.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
All right. So yay, there we go. Red dots. I'm not a convert yet. I probably would be if I switched any of my guns to one. So that's another reason why I'm avoiding it, because then I'd have to put it on all of them. And who can afford that? I can't right now anyway. All right, so we can start putting this all together. Again, the whole assuming, we'll try doing this with a sort of making our stance as well. And something, I'm going to go back to stance just for a second. One of the reasons, I was talking about having that stance with the shoulders rolled forward, elbows as straight as possible, but not necessarily locked. Another, that's a part of all recoil control. And I was talking about the power going through, you want that to, all that energy to go all the way up to your shoulders so that it's absorbed in the largest area possible. Another reason behind that with leaning forward is also because that recoil, even though you're absorbing it, you are still absorbing it backwards. So if you're already standing straight up, when that recoil happens, if you're standing straight up like this, it's going to knock you backwards. And especially if you're standing, I stand with 1 foot forward. Again, that's what I have found that works the best for me. And that's something that you'll need to experiment with once you're doing live fire. If you're really not real happy with both of your feet being in the same position, parallel to each other, you might want to try moving one forward or one back. If I have a preference, or if I have chance to, time to think about what I'm doing, I'll put my left foot forward, just like a fighting stance. Some people, there's different names for it. I won't get into the names of all the stances. there's three main ones right now, but the basic one is what we'll stick with. And then if you still feel unstable in that position, that's when you can start kind of playing with where you want to put your feet for sure. Still always toes forward. I've seen some people have a stance where they cock one foot to the side. I don't know why, but that can actually that can throw you off sometimes as far as the direction of where things are going. It can actually pull you, depending on, if you're trying to aim straight forward and you've got your feet like this, or your feet like this, or like this, that can actually throw you off a little bit. So you want to start centered, and then from there you can decide whether or not you're more stable if you've got your feet one way or the other. But I would stick with this to start. But my feet are like this, and I find that just to be the most stable. It's easiest for me to lean forward. I think some ladies especially, because we can be top heavy. So if we're not supporting that with one foot with a little bit of weight forward, then you can feel like, even though you're recoil controlling fine because you're all forward, you also feel like you're going to fall forward, and you have to use a lot more core to keep yourself stable, and that's kind of exhausting. So
I in my very relaxed environment where I get to shoot, I find that I am more upright, and when I try to lean forward, my shots aren't as good of quality, but I know that that's something that I just need to work on and practice on more. And I think it is that top heaviness that kind of throws things off.
Yeah, it's a little bit. And then also that there's this, it feels like a really small thing, but if you're shooting straight forward and you've just got everything up here relaxed, that can actually also, leaning forward just a little bit will help you roll your shoulders up.
Okay.
If you're standing straight up, you can try it right now. If you're straight up in your chair and you just hold your arms forward, it feels natural, it feels comfortable. But if you lean forward in the chair, it actually feels a little bit more comfortable if you do roll those shoulders up a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. It does.
Where the shoulders rolled forward, sitting straight up, is not comfortable.
Right.
If you do lean forward a little bit, it's actually comfortable.
Yeah.
It still will feel awkward until you're used to it. But yeah.
Yeah, I never thought about rolling the shoulders.
Yeah. So you definitely do want to lean forward a little bit, even if you've got the top heavy thing going on. But that's kind of where my left foot forward comes in a little bit more too.
Great.
All right. So putting it all together with actually dry firing. Have you done dry firing at home?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's a challenge that I've been working on with some of the guys that are good with the Mantis and know more about Glocks than I do. So I've been doing it, but not that much yet.
Okay. So is there a particular challenge that you've come across personally, or is it just like competitive?
Well, so because I learned about firearms from my dad, and when he was actively purchasing and shooting guns on a regular basis, Glocks didn't really exist. He hasn't been all that helpful with my Glock. So what I have found is that because of and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong in the terminology, but because of the internal safety, when you pull the trigger, it locks back and you have to reset every time. So somebody pointed me towards the Glock E-Trainer, which overrides that function. And since I've gotten it, we've just been preparing for annual, and I had a vacation and all that. So since I've gotten it, I haven't been able to play with it too much. So that's the only problem.
Okay. All right, that's cool. So yeah, because what you're talking about is otherwise you have to reset. You have to you have to rack your slide between every shot.
Every time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not just Glock. That's a striker. That's a striker thing. So like if you've seen me, or you may not have noticed, but when I was demonstrating the trigger earlier, every time I pulled the trigger, I was resetting. So yeah, it's either something that you just either get used to or not.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a pain point for people that dry fire at home.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know if that handy little gadget, they make them for SIGs, but I should look into that too.
It's definitely, because of that, it's definitely much nicer to live fire.
Yeah, for sure. Something that I never remember if we actually talk about, I don't think we do. So something that I talk about, and actually like doing that slide reset and racking the slide is actually something I do like to talk about as its own entity, which I don't think it really talks about in our training material. So there's two general ways of racking that slide. I call them the slingshot method and then the overhand method. And I teach them both because not everyone knows what's the most comfortable for them until they've tried it. And it can come up with people that have less hand strength. I hate to say that I point it necessarily towards women because I find men have their preferences as well. So it's not necessarily a male-female thing, but it can be a hand strength issue. So especially people who have less hand strength, then I talk about the overhand method versus versus the slingshot method of actually racking, resetting the slide. So what you'll see people doing when they're when they're doing this at the range, you'll be doing this whenever you reload, anything like that. You'll see people do things two ways. You'll see them, that's the slingshot method. So you're just grabbing the back of the slide, usually with the side of your index finger and your thumb, and you're just pulling it back and letting it go. A beginner issue that I see as well is riding the slide. So this is something that you want to make sure that you're not doing, is not helping the gun when you're loading that chamber. You don't need to help it. It's got springs. It does it on its own when you pull the trigger. Sometimes I'll see people, they'll go to load it, rack it, and then when they go to let go, they help it, and they kind of just like, and that's called riding the slide, and that will actually cause misfeeds. So you don't want to do that. You want to just pull that slide back till it stops and just let it go. And whether you do the slingshot method or overhand, either way, it's just bringing it back to where it stops and then just let it go. So slingshot method, that's especially with guys, you'll see this the most often. And that's just, and it's simple, but it does take some hand strength to do. And sometimes folks can have trouble with it, or it hurts their fingers. So the other way that I teach is overhand, and that's this way. So the only big trick that I find with teaching overhand is keeping people from turning the gun. So if you're at an open range with nobody else around, it's not as big a deal. But if you do this at a range that's got range safety officers, if it's really crowded, if it's definitely like packed lane to lane, and you go to rack your slide like this, somebody's probably going to call you on it. And you could possibly, depending on how strict the range is, get kicked out if they see you do it more than once or twice. So the tricky part with teaching this is if you are going to rack your slide overhand, you just have to remember, keep that muzzle down range. And in order to do it, you're going to want to turn your body to the side, not the gun. So your overhand method is going to be with your first 3 fingers, and you're going to keep your pinky out of the way. You have to make sure that you're not covering that chamber, because when you do this, you're either going to be ejecting, you'll be ejecting around. So you want to make sure that your hand is out of the way when that's happening. So your thumb's going to go across the back, first 3 fingers, pinky out of the way. So you're kind of tilting your hand towards your other hand so that chamber is open, and anything you're ejecting out of there is not going to hit your hand. And then you've got, the meaty part of your hand is going to be up against the side of that slide, as far back as possible. And then with those 3 fingers, you're not necessarily pulling. I tend to pull, but I think it's just because I don't have a hand strength issue. What's the easiest for a lot of people is you're actually holding this hand still, and you're pushing the gun forward with your other hand. That way it feels like a little less manipulative with this hand. Once you've got your grip, you just kind of hold it as tight as you can, and then push the gun forward. But again, not in this direction as we are at the range, because that'll get you in trouble. So you're going to be doing it this way. And then again, you're going to just let that slide go, and then you're loaded and ready to go. So you can either do that way, or you can do the slingshot. A lot of people, like me, when I'm dry firing at home, I tend to do the slingshot because I'm moving the gun less, and I'm back on target faster. So especially if I'm trying to do like time targeting, I'm doing it this way just because that gets me back where I need to go quicker, rather than just moving the whole gun and my whole arm every time I need to do it. But 2 different ways.
I tend to do the sideways overhand. It's just more comfortable. And as a new person, I'm still working on grip strength as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, whatever. I find that I tend to use both. So I don't preach one way or the other. You'll find that some people will tell you you're doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. If you're already doing it and it's already working, mm-hmm. then take that with a grain of salt.
Right.
But if you do get a formal trainer in person and they try to correct that, I would give a little pushback on that one, because if it's already working for you and you're doing it safely, there's no reason not to. Yeah, you will.
Can any of our moderators give us like a time check just so we can make sure?
There's about 16 minutes left.
Okay, I think we're almost there.
We only have a handful of questions too.
Okay, cool. All right, so loading. That's the last thing that we need to cover. And I left my snap caps in the car. So I'm not going to break the rules and use live ammunition for this. But yeah, I think all my snap caps are outside somewhere right now. But we'll talk about it verbally at any rate. Magazines. So my magazines, I think your Glocks have a nice, don't you have a nice orange or red follower on yours? It's real easy to see. No? It's black? Okay.
I'm like, where did my magazines go? I was cleaning up earlier. Nope, it's all black.
Okay. Huh, cool. Okay. So, magazines, loading, unloading. This is also part of Make It Safe, something that you can definitely take away, or other people can take away. Mike, if you want to pop in here and just to show real quick how to load a magazine.
Sure.
And
that's the only thing we need the snap caps for.
Sorry, Scott said that the new ones have orange. The older ones are black, and mine's a Gen 3 because I'm in California, so maybe that's why it's black.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I'm used to seeing like orange or red ones. But
so this is a Gen 4 Glock magazine, G21, double stack. Sorry about the lighting. So dummy rounds, snap cap. They go into the magazine, back end first, like so. Sorry, this is a little awkward. I don't usually load like this. And they just push down.
It's true.
Why not, Mike?
Right?
That looks great. I think you should do it like that all the time.
So they just slip in there like that, facing forward.
Yeah, what I like to talk about is when you're holding the magazine up, forward is up. So all of your magazines, when you look at them, are tilted, and up is out. That's the best way that I can usually explain it, especially when you're trying to orient to loading into your gun. Up is out. So if you're pointing up, that's not out, right? Your cartridge is going to discharge this way. So up is out. Go ahead. Sorry.
So to continue, so here we have a loaded magazine with 3 dummy rounds. This is the G21, presently, unloaded. So with the rounds facing the same direction as the muzzle, goes inside, clicks in, like so, and it is now loaded. Unloading, drop the magazine out, eject the round, that's in the chamber. Now unload it again.
Cool. Could you load that one more time and just show a quick, just for those who might not know what a press check looks like? Let's do a real quick little press check just so newbies can kind of see how they can check their chamber without ejecting a round.
So in other words, so loading again, clicks into place, slide closed. Press check, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Did I just load this? I don't remember.
Okay, right. So again, muzzle safe direction, finger off the trigger, and pull it back slightly. Whoops, that was a little too much. And we see there's a chamber inside. So, okay.
Yeah, so if you pull it back just a little bit, you'll, it's called the press check. And that's just pulling back just a smidge so that you can actually see that there's a round in there. But you're not ejecting that round. You'll find it's a careful balance. It can be a kind of nice practice to do at home with snap cap, just so that you can get that practice in of just pulling that, because you're just getting to the tightest part of the spring when you're press checking. So if you pull it too far back, you're just going to pop that round out. But if you do it just a little bit, and that's really for, if you don't have a chamber indicator, it depends on the gun. I've got a Springfield that's actually got a chamber indicator. It's got a little piece that pops up when the chamber's loaded. My SIGs have a little tiny gap right here that you can actually see the shiny round in if it's loaded. But not all guns have that. And if you just threw a magazine in there and now you're not sure, or you got distracted, you set it down, you talk to somebody, and now you're like, crap, did I chamber that round? I don't know. You can press check and make sure that it's in there or not. So Mike just demonstrated loading the magazine, inserting it into the pistol, pull the slide to the rear to and release it in order to chamber that round. And then if you have safety, once that's loaded, especially with something like this that's a single action, once I've racked that slide, so once I just throw a magazine in there, got my magazine thrown in, once I rack that slide back, that will bring my hammer back. That pushes back the hammer, and then when I release that slide, it's ready to go. So if I were to carry this gun or put it down, like this is also a 2-pound trigger. So this is something that if you're not really careful with, you really can accidentally set this off. So the next thing that you need to make sure you do is that you've got that safety turned on. If the hammer's back, safety needs to be on. Safety should be on regardless if you're not ready to shoot. But it's just that step. Once you've loaded it, racked it, safety on.
Got it.
All right, and then mostly in the reverse, what Mike also just demonstrated as well is just the unloading, and that is something that you come across. Something that newer people might not be used to as well is it's one of those things that you come across in dry fire that you don't think about when you are putting an empty magazine into the gun. Usually it's you've been shooting the gun, right? You've been boom, 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 you're shooting the gun, now your magazine's empty. If there's a magazine in there, the follower that's at the top of that magazine, that's what actually locks your slide back. So that's one of the little mechanics that people don't always understand right away, is that little plastic follower up there is actually what causes that slide lock when your magazine's empty. And that's something that doesn't always work either. So it's one of those things to be aware of. Sometimes you've got an empty magazine, but it doesn't lock back on that last round. And that can be either a new gun issue that actually resolves once there's a little bit of wear that's happening with your magazines, or later on, it could actually be starting to have a problem with wear on your magazine. Something to be aware of, but also something that comes up in dry fire is like you're used to it locking back on its own, but if you don't have a magazine in there, it never locks back unless you're actually using your slide lock with your thumb and locking it back manually. So it's just something to watch for and be aware of with just like the mechanics of things. So when you're unloading, especially at home in a dry fire situation, you're unloading if you've got snap caps in there. Same kind of idea. It's just it comes up because you're used to at the range that lock back happening. That doesn't happen at home. So pull the slide to the rear, lock it back, and then you're visually checking everything and making sure that it's all empty. So that's also part of Make It Safe. If nothing else comes up with people, if they have any questions about guns, or if their first question is just like, what do I do if I come across a gun? Like, I don't know about anybody else who's in this room right now, but I'm in Chicago, and I have absolutely had people at work when they find out I'm a gun person. I've had several say that their first interaction with a gun was finding one on the sidewalk. So, yeah. Absolutely.
Wow.
So yes, and who knows what happened in the 15 minutes before they found it, but somebody dropped it and ran. So they definitely come to me with those questions of what do I do if I find a gun? Because in Chicago, you can find a gun. Mm-hmm. So teaching them how to make it safe. As the first thing is really good, and then hopefully and I've had those couple people were like, and that was when they were 10. So teach your kids, teach your kids. I'm a strong believer in not teaching the don't touch rule. I teach the make it safe rule. So, all right, that takes us to. We're getting close to needing to be done, right?
Did you want to segue to questions at this point?
Yeah, let's do some questions because we're down to like the range safety stuff, which is really better addressed at the range anyway.
Gotcha. At the very beginning, there was a question with regards to dissonance and how it could actually cause accidents when you're talking about handling all firearms as as loaded,
As if
even
they're
though they
loaded.
are unloaded.
Yeah.
They'd like to you to expand on that if possible.
So that's the rule. That's one of the rules that we've manipulated and actually kind of taken out, is because that's kind of what we talk about, is that treat all firearms as if they're always loaded. It's true, but it's not true, right? Because I just made this one safe, and I'm going to clean it now. There's a dissonance there where I'm going to do stuff to this gun that I normally wouldn't if it was loaded. So I have to like make that disconnect of, okay, I'm going to treat this gun as if it's loaded until right now, when I'm going to point the barrel in weird directions, trying to get it taken apart. And that's kind of the idea of where some accidents can happen, because people aren't really good at 100% making that disconnect. So if you're actually leaning more towards doing the rules the way we have them worded, which I need to find again because I don't have them memorized. Always remember that you are in control of a weapon, and then if you use it negligently, it may injure or kill you or someone else. If you're thinking in that way, if you're thinking in the way of this is going to kill somebody, you're going to be a lot more careful with it no matter what you're doing with it. So you're always going to make sure that you've got it pointed somewhere safe. You're not going to think it's fun to point it at your cat, whether you think it's loaded or not. It's one of those where, I actually had an instructor once very early on. Me and a friend of mine had a instructor who was just teaching the two of us. We had, I forget the word. We hired him just for us. And we were in the classroom portion, and he had a revolver and he unloaded it. He had us check it, so everybody in the room knew it was unloaded. But then he also handed it to me and told me to point it at him. Well, yeah, I know it's unloaded. And so in this case, we're making an exception, and he was an NRA certified instructor. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not pointing this gun at you. I don't care if I know it's unloaded and you know it's unloaded and we've all checked that it's unloaded. I'm not going to do that, because I still know that this can kill somebody, and I'm not going to change that mindset. And so by not changing that mindset, I don't point guns at people, whether it's in fun, whether I know it's loaded or not. I don't have that dissonant thing of, because you take guns apart, because you do some things with them that may point the muzzle in an unsafe direction. There are times that you have to do that. Even if you know it's unloaded, you still have that little disconnect that happens with that rule that says treat all guns as if they're loaded all the time. Sometimes they're not, and sometimes you have to point them in an unsafe direction. So if you're always mindful of that, you're never going to touch that trigger when you have that barrel pointed in an unsafe direction. That's two things that are kind of happening that you really have to be more mindful of. And if you don't have that disconnect required in order to follow that one rule, now you're always going to be a little bit more safe.
The last question was answered in chat, but I figured it might be worth a quick revisit about dry firing. And
Yeah.
What was said was dry firing shouldn't hurt a quality firearm, with the exception of rim fire. If there's anything you wanted to add to that, or if you just wanted to have that on video here.
I don't know. I think even with modern rim fires, I think other people would have better opinions than I would, because I don't really know that much. I do have snap caps for my rim fire as well, so I do some dry fire with this, but I do also have snap caps for it. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to. Snap caps are super cheap, so if you're that worried about dry firing your rim fire guns, then stick a snap cap in there and that'll protect it.
There's actually a trick to snap caps for 22s. You always want to use snap caps with rimfire because you can break your firing pin. But you can buy, there's a type of drywall molly that's the same size as a 22 snap cap. And I'll look it up and I'll drop it in the Discord.
Yes, please.
And it's a cheap way to practice with your 22s.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's basically it.
Patrick's got it on his video if you want to take a look at it.
Yeah, there you go. The little 22 snap caps.
There's a snap cap, and then he's got the little drywall molly.
That's it. That's exactly it. And they're, I don't know, $4 for a pack of 50 at Home Depot or something.
Yeah,
They're really cheap.
And they're, but you do need to use them in your 22s. It's important. You can in your all rimfire, but especially in the 22s.
So everybody say thanks to Kat and to Danielle.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Kat.
Danielle.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Kat.
Kat.
I learned so much. I'm
Oh,
really
good. Yay.